Welcome to the programme. Geographically, of course, Europe is going nowhere. But where is it actually heading in the course of the next 12 months? The challenges for a continent with more than twice the population of the United States. This is Roundtable. Well, it's very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Pleased to say that joining us out of Brive-la-Gaillarde in France, Susi Dennison, Director of the Europe Power Programme at the European Council on Foreign Relations. We go to London and welcome once again Denis Macshane, former Europe Minister for the UK, and then to Paris, where we see the political commentator and columnist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Great to have you all on the programme. We're going to be tackling things a little bit differently today as we look at the coming year. And first up, the financial fight back after coronavirus. The economic crisis created by the pandemic has left nations across the globe desperate to find a way out. The European Union's hoping the answer lies in its biggest ever stimulus package, a more than $900 billion recovery fund called Next Generation EU. Brussels says it will create a greener, more digital and more resilient Europe. But that resilience may be tested. The massive slowdown in Europe's economy caused by the pandemic has left an unprecedented hole in national budgets. With debt piling up and economies on shaky ground, there is concern that future financial stresses could put EU unity under further strain. Susi, let me come to you first of all on this one. 27 members of the European Union, $900 billion, and each one of those countries is going to say, we deserve it more than you do. There's going to be quite a lot of wrangling over this.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the package isn't perfect. But I think that when we look back at 2020, the agreement around this deal will be one of the positive stories that actually came out of 2020. Of course, it is a compromise, as everything that happens at 27 has to be. But I think it does focus on the things that European citizens are concerned about right now. Firstly, the economic crisis that we're in following the coronavirus. Secondly, the need for the recovery from that crisis to be both one which builds resilient societies for the next crisis, but also greener societies, that we don't sort of sweep aside the last thing that we were worried about in dealing with corona, but climate change remains very high in European citizens' priorities. And then thirdly, and this was the point that almost pushed the agreement off course in December, there is a focus within this package on the importance of European money being spent well on what it's intended for. We at ECFR have been carrying out some public opinion surveying in 2020, looking at how Europeans feel about the EU after the agreement of this package. And one of the things which is very high in citizens' concerns, including in the frugal states, but also France and Germany, is not so much about the amount of money that we're going to have to spend on the recovery, but about the risk that there could be misuse of those public funds. When we asked whether people felt that this showed that Europe was spending too much money, actually 8 out of 10 European citizens didn't choose that option, but the answers were much higher when we asked whether they were concerned about the misuse of those funds. So I think certainly,
Susi, I'm going to have to stop you because we're doing this program a little bit differently and go to Denis. What do you think the biggest challenges are? Where should the money be spent?
It should be spent where the different countries need it. It can't be decided centrally in Brussels or by one sort of ideological faction within the whole of the European Union 27 member states. It's the biggest transfer since the Marshall Plan. And I think we should be responsible and trust responsible leaders to spend it. Now, the Marshall Plan had Marshall planners in every capital city, making sure that money, this is the 1950s, was spent correctly. I certainly think the Commission needs to have recovery agents or agencies, small offices, not big bureaucracies, just to make sure there's no double dipping or dodgy use of the money. But after that, let people decide. It may be more digi, it may be training for green jobs, it may be trying to invent clusters, free ports. This should also be a chance to reinvent a bit, I think, the European economy and seek to make it more exciting, dynamic in the way, frankly, it hasn't been for all of this century.
Anne-Elisabeth, we've got a French presidential election coming up next year. Is there going to be a lot of politicking about what the priorities are for the rescue package in your country?
Strangely enough, I don't think there will be, because it's seen as too remote. The French are by and large pro-European, but they sort of leave it aside. It's not. We are going to have lots of questions about vaccination in France and why we're at the bottom of the pile. We're going to have lots of questions about various aspects of the economy. France is very gifted to organize make-work jobs. We've had subsidized jobs for people who couldn't get into the labor market. We've got the most unwieldy labor market in the western part of the EU, with structural unemployment that's always been between 8 and 10%. So the one thing that's going to make Emmanuel Macron very happy, because he's got to seduce, to sort of, it's the French word, but he's got to charm those voters, is the fact that 37% of the outlays of the rescue plan have got to go to the green economy and fight combating climate change, and he's fighting on this. There's a green vote. It's not as big as it looked in the last municipal elections, but it still can mean the difference for him between coming second or third in the second round of the presidential election in May 22. And if he comes third, he's not in the game, and whoever faces Marine Le Pen will not be him. He will have lost. So in that respect, I think he will make a great deal of this, because it would justify Europe being a good thing to campaign on. It would be something that would be a wink to green voters, and at the same time he hopes that it will make France forget that the shambles of the European purchase of vaccines that has been picked up in France now as one of the reasons.
We will come to that. I'm going to have to stop you because we're doing this slightly different. We're going to come to France and the vaccine a little bit later, but right now, the end of an era in 2021, Germany's Angela Merkel is going to be stepping down. Elected as German Chancellor in 2005, she was once described as the world's most powerful woman. By the time she leaves office after elections in September, Angela Merkel will have been at the heart of European politics for 16 years. During that time, she built a reputation for pragmatism and caution, playing a central role responding to major events like the 2008 recession and the 2015 migrant crisis. But there's been criticism too. Her poll ratings fell in recent years, and there have even been accusations that she played a part in the rise of nationalist populist parties across Europe. So what will her legacy be, and what happens next as we say goodbye, Frau Merkel? Denis, you were Europe Minister for the UK. I think the end of your tenure coincided with the beginning of hers as Chancellor, and you were on a couple of conferences with her, as I have been as a host of these conferences. Difficult woman to get to know, but to be admired?
Oh, yes. I mean, she is so calm. If I may compare her very briefly with both Anne-Elisabeth, President in France, and our Prime Minister here, who are flamboyant and full of gestures and strike poses in their very different ways. And here is just a competent, sensible woman who has seen off 5 British prime ministers. She's on her 4th French president. My goodness, I mean, she is the living embodiment of European politics. I think that obviously in that long reign, there are some dodgy questions. Nothing can be perfect. But on the whole, she's kept Germany together after the problems of unification. She's pushed back the extreme right-wing populists, the anti-European Alternative für Deutschland. She's succeeded, I hope, in bringing in new arrivals, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. It was very controversial at the time. She's come out of nuclear power, difficult, dodgy coal power, fossil fuel power, and is set the course for the green revolution. But she's done it globally by not striking big postures. She's not incredibly anti-Russian or incredibly anti-Chinese or incredibly anti-American. She just says, "Wir schaffen das. We can do it. Let's work together. We can do it." I just hope whoever succeeds her, and it's too early to sort of have that discussion, it will be someone of that competence.
That will be a program we're doing in the very near future. Who comes after Frau Merkel? Anne-Elisabeth, is there appreciation in France, or perhaps some resentment about the position that Angela Merkel has taken at the centre of European politics for the last decade and a half?
I would say there has been resentment at times for the inflexibility of the European Central Bank, which is widely seen as a new incarnation of the Bundesbank. But that would have happened anyway, because that's the nature of the Germans' relationship with debt and lack of it. I think there's admiration for her because she is seen, as Denis very rightly said, as a very calm person, somebody who's resolute, who's hardworking. People noticed how calm, unflappable, and sensible she was about COVID from the start, how the reaction to COVID from the start in Germany was much better than it was in France, and especially how her press conferences, far away from the literary flights of fancy of Mr. Macron, turned out to be a scientist, which she is. She has a double doctorate in physics and chemistry, and how she explained what was going on in terms that any layman could understand, and at the same time that were very precise. And I think that is really what remains of her.
Susi, in 2 minutes, can you possibly tell me what her biggest achievement and her biggest misjudgments perhaps have been?
Well, I think I would add to the list of achievements that Denis has given, that she's also presided over a period where Germany has come to terms with the necessity of European leadership from Berlin, and I think that has been very important for the way that the EU has sort of grown during that period. If we look at foreign policy, the area that I focus on, that sort of German role, always making an effort to sort of to anchor it in terms of the Franco-German motor, but whenever France has been absent, including through the migration crisis in 2015, which Denis alluded to, I think we've seen Angela Merkel really drive that forward. And I think
has she had any major failures? Sorry to rush you. Has she had any major failings of her own?
I mean, I think the period where her relatively stable popularity outside Germany looked most shaky was indeed after the migration crisis, because there was a real sense that the German decision to open up its borders to Syrian refugees imposed certain things on other European countries, and I think that created a real sort of fracture within the European Union.
But as a major figure in Europe, very quickly, Susi, if you would, she will be missed?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this 2021 is going to be a very testing year for the EU, because we're going to see not only Germany focused internally on the upcoming federal elections, but also France in preparation for the presidential elections next year. So I think that that sort of core of leadership at the centre of Europe will be very difficult over the coming months.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we're moving on to Brexit, a trade deal signed, yes, but have all the issues, well, have they been resolved at all? After almost a year of gridlock, the UK and the EU struck a post-Brexit trade and security deal just days ahead of the deadline of December the 31st. The agreement was welcomed by EU leaders in Brussels, and the bloc's chief negotiator believes that Brexit has shown politicians and voters that leaving the European Union is not a good idea. Michel Barnier said recently, "These negotiations have reinforced the conviction of leaders and citizens that it is better to be together rather than on one's own." But what will Brexit and the $900 billion trade deal mean for the European Union in the long term? Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, you were making a few of the front pages in the UK in the last few days with your letter in which you said, well, perhaps Britain's right to leave the European Union now, even though you don't think it's a wise idea in terms of practicalities. And you wrote, we've needed the EU like a fish needs a bicycle. British friends, you were right all along. So what's going wrong, in your opinion, with the EU?
What's going right, and I think it works for Britain. I'm not advocating for France to leave Europe, but for Britain, even though I think it's actually going to be tough for the first few years, I think there are aspects of sovereignty, and there's also the aspect of the ever closer union that's being driven without any kind of dissent being allowed, and I think that's rather sad. I also think that there was a nimbleness about the British in general, and fact that the Britain is actually capable of improvising on the fly, and we have just seen this with the example of the vaccines. The vaccines were purchased in the most bureaucratic possible haggling system, in which the European Union had 6 months to organize purchasing future vaccines, and they bought from 6 suppliers, including suppliers who have not produced a vaccine, with the result that the people who got the most angry, the French just lied about it. The German health minister, Jens Spahn, who actually might very well become chancellor after Mrs. Merkel, who's a quite remarkable health minister, tried to push from the start to say we do not need non-existent Sanofi vaccine doses. What we need is more of Pfizer. And eventually he had to wait 2 weeks in order to get his government to agree to buy 30 million doses of vaccine. And it showed that, first of all, the departure for the vaccination campaign was delayed. Germany was ready 2 weeks before, was delayed because Europe wanted to make a gesture of European unity and have
Anne-Elisabeth,
all the 27
I'm sorry,
countries
you're
start
in full
together.
flow, but I'm going to have to stop you because we've got 2 other people to get in half the time that's left. So, Susi, your thoughts post-Brexit, winners, losers?
Look, I'm British myself, but I do tend to think that given how far Britain has sort of drifted from the EU particularly since 2016, I think that the fact that we have in the end got a deal means that we're in the sort of the best possible position at this point, and I think we have to allow some bedding down time before moving to sort of try and focus on the areas of common interest and rebuilding relations between Europe and UK. And I think that when heads have cooled, we will find that there are plenty of those things, from security to trade and so on, where the UK will want to come back to the discussion table to look at how we can cooperate on the systems that are so important to both
Dennis,
sides.
what do you think? 2021 and beyond, do you think the UK will prosper as much as has been suggested by those people that advocated leaving the European Union? Is it possible?
There isn't a single economist, there isn't the Office of Budget Responsibility that agrees with that. I mean, we're going to face a decline in our GDP. We'll be pure but poor. Perhaps that's actually the way forward for many of us. This deal, of course, the EU 27 signed off on it. They get 100 billion trade surplus from it, because the deal only covers 19th century economic production, that's to say goods and food. And in that, the EU sell far more to us than we sell to them. So they're the big winners from it. The 21st century economy, brains, services, creative, bankers, professionals, architects, everybody like that, we've got to wait to negotiate, which is why we're entering what I call an era of Brexiternity. Sorry, Susi, sorry, Anne-Elisabeth, nothing was finished on the 29th of December. We're going to start negotiating all over again. And yesterday, on Sunday on the BBC, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, one of the ultra-Ulster Unionist politicians, said in 4 years' time, the Northern Ireland Assembly can vote down everything that's been agreed on Ireland, and that will blow this deal out of the water. This is going to be a very tricky forward-going process. We've already heard that some £7 billion of securities were moved in 10 minutes from London to European capitals when trading opened on the London stock market after the holidays. We're going to see a lot more of that.
Dennis, I'm going to have to stop you. I'm going to have to stop you. I'm like the man with the bell, but we're moving on to what we were thinking of as any other business in this. We're going to talk about other countries that may get involved in separatism, if you like to call it that, from the EU, or again with the European Union. Scotland elections later this year, pro-Scottish nationalists and independents likely to do very well. They may well ask, and sometime in the future, get a referendum on independence. If they do get independence, they may want to rejoin the EU, which is a rather complicated way of me saying, does anybody have any ideas of countries within the European Union bloc who may want to leave, as Britain did?
Well, no. One of the paradoxes of Brexit, 2016 gave us Brexit and Donald Trump. The Americans have had the good sense to get rid of Donald Trump. Brexit actually produced the extraordinary effect of really doing damage to all the anti-European nationalist populist parties. Marine Le Pen, the AfD in Germany, FPO in Austria, SVP, the Swiss People's Party, etc., and in Netherlands, Sweden. And you've actually got a rise of Greens and more interesting new parties in Europe, as Europe looked with horror at Brexit and said, okay, we don't like Brussels. Oh, we're bored with Brussels bureaucracy and silly rules that we can all listen to with blue in the face. But leave Europe, you must be mad. Oh, it's the Brits are doing it.
Okay,
well, we know the
Susi,
Brits are mad.
Susi, do you agree with Dennis on that one? Unity's stronger than
Yeah, I
ever?
do tend to agree. I think that the Brexit decision in the UK sort of popularised the idea of referenda among populist parties, but not necessarily the idea of leaving the EU. And I think the experience of the UK since then has turned more nationalist parties sort of off the idea than brought new ones on. But that said, I mean, I think a lot depends. I would disagree with the idea that the populist nationalist wave is over. I think that this the recession which we're now moving into provides real fertile ground for a lot of those parties to kind of to push forward, and they'll be watching sort of how the UK fares. I agree it doesn't look good at the moment, but I think that we shouldn't rest on our laurels, and certainly the tensions that we've seen around the recovery package that we started off talking about this afternoon in certain countries show that the EU remains very diverse, and it'll be about a period of each country finding their place within that diversity.
Okay, since populism has been mentioned, Anne-Elisabeth, I'll come to you. And you mentioned earlier Marine Le Pen, presidential elections in France next year. Migration, is it still a massive issue in France? And do you see there being problems for the European Union in the 12 months or slightly longer term ahead?
It's a problem, but it's more a problem because of a second and third generation children of migrant families who haven't been able to assimilate into French society. It still will be a red flag, but no more than others. But if we want to talk about populists in general, it is very true that European populists have not advocated leaving the EU because their countries usually get more out of the EU than they feel they would outside it. It was very interesting that I was at a conference in Budapest with journalists asking members of Viktor Orban's government whether they were prepared for Hungarexit, and they looked at the questioners as if they were mad because they obviously are getting enough from Europe that it's working out fine for them. On the other hand, Scotland may find it very difficult to get back into the EU because Spain will be against making it easy because of Catalonia.
No. If I may, David, very quickly, the French Foreign Ministry said very clearly, if Scotland has a legal referendum, which the Catalonians never did, it leaves the UK constitutionally, legally, with the approval of all the parliaments. Madrid will not block an EU application from Scotland. I'm very worried that the great gift Brexit, which is fantastically unpopular in Scotland, and Boris Johnson is also very unpopular, is giving to Her Majesty in the closing years of her reign. She may finish her days as Queen of England, no longer Queen of a United Kingdom, because that is the poisonous effect of Brexit that is doing so much damage in our combined British Isles.
One last chance. This one is for Susi to add a couple of items to the Any Other Business agenda, things we haven't talked about that we really should keep an eye out for in the coming 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think that this is going to be a really big year in terms of the battle of narratives around Europe in 2021. We've talked about the upcoming French and German elections. We've also got the Dutch elections in the spring. And a number of other contests going on at sort of local and regional level, which are going to be quite critical. And so I think that it is very important that we don't kind of take our eye off this question of European cohesion and what sort of global actor emerges over the coming years.
Listen, thank you very much indeed. A continent with 700 million plus people, well, it's going to pack a punch. It's just what sort of punch it does pack in the coming 12 months. Much appreciated having all three of you back on Roundtable, and wherever you happen to be watching this program, we also appreciate the time that you have given us. Do so again next time. Until then, from me, David Foster, and the team, goodbye.